Hey there folks, thank you for joining me. I can't really do much about the shadows that are imposed upon my face here by this here mic. I have like 6,000 lights in my face, so bear with me at least on that front. For this video, maybe the next one, I don't know. We'll see. Cutesy little critters doing kung fu and trying to kill each other. Now that's kind of like the Cliff Notes version of what Biomutant is, or at least what it was, or well, it still is, it still exists. It's a game that I was excited for upon hearing about it. It contributed to the little growth spurt that my channel had, so I have that to thank for it if nothing else. Thanks, little guy. You really did it. I think like many of you, when this game came out, I think it was last year, like many of you, I tapped into that hype a bit too much, and the finished product, when I was done with it, left me kind of wanting. A lot of the surface here has promise, and you can see the ambition on display that just really never kind of takes off or gets there, at least in my mind. And that was further reaffirmed when I replayed Biomutant natively for PS5. If you don't know, if I haven't mentioned it here on this channel, I'm kind of a trophy fiend. And it's not so much a hobby, so much as it is a problem that I honestly just wish I could get help for, but I don't think such help exists. So for the time being, we're just gonna keep talking about games that I've platinumed, or that we're just going to talk about games that we're interested in. So as somebody who likes trophies, seeing that transferring your save would not guarantee your trophies would pop on PS5, and to my knowledge, at the recording of this video at least, it's still not working properly. I did the only right thing, which was just to play it, beat it, and platinum it again. And I know there's kind of a little bit of a debate of whether or not you've earned that trophy again on PS5, if you're just popping them or not, but I don't care, man. I just wanted my trophies to carry over, pop again, but it was a good excuse to make a Biomutant on PS5 video. Now of which, that reminds me, maybe just slip your finger on ye old subscribe button if you're feeling a little frisky, or maybe your mouse is malfunctioning. We can tell your family and friends that your mouse slipped on the subscribe button, if that makes you feel better. Now, at the risk of immediately just throwing you off this video, I'll just point you to my review of this game from a while back when the game came out, because I will tell you that my opinion probably has not changed much. I suggested the game was a wait for a sale. I think $20 to $30 for an open world RPG that, if nothing else, is a great game to turn on a video, like maybe so, or a podcast while playing is more than sufficient. And now we have the PS5 and Series X versions of the game here, and you want me to get on with it and tell you what the fuck I think about it. Come on, Ryan. We are whatever minutes into this video, whatever number of minutes is on the timeline here, and we need to get on with the show. So go and watch that review. This is probably going to be a little bit more in depth of a review or critique, I would say. In replaying it, I was reminded of the worst of it, but I also entirely understand why people love this game, where people may like it more than others. It succeeds among everything else in just a general feeling of tranquility and calm, even is a bit whimsical at times. With that, it does make it hard for me to outright hate the game or even dislike it, but those are just general thoughts. Remember them as I really dig into the game pretty hard in a bit. Now, there will be some to say on the story, but it's honestly not that important in the grand scheme of the game, so maybe just we're going to start with the gameplay here. Biomutant came out on PS5, and I re-entered Biomutant after over a year or so away, and I found myself in the familiar trappings of expecting I would probably rekindle some kind of enjoyment or excitement that compared to right before this game came out for me. But when I bought into that hype, it wasn't exactly panning out once I started playing it. As I played the game, I was quickly reminded of how a game like Biomutant can look cute and even cool and fun, even look like it plays well, but when you spend more than a few hours with it, maybe even more than 10 hours, it kind of starts to fall apart in more ways than one. If you haven't played Biomutant, or even if you have, I'll just summarize the gameplay as best as I can. So you have melee attacks of which you can dual wield, or you use one heavy weapon or a one-handed sword. Range attacks where you use one gun, dual wield guns, or a two-handed weapon such as a shotgun or rifle. Finally, you have magic or psi abilities and small biomutations. Overall, there's a lot of cool sounding abilities like Key Spark or Mucus Bubble, or even Phoenix and Viper Bite. And to be fair, they do look cool, at least in the moment, but that's where I would leave all of my praise. I find that the combat looks flashier than it actually is or feels, and even sounds a bit, well, it tends to feel like a kind of weightless and has the feeling of punching an empty bag. A lot of times I would find myself just repeating the same move over and over again just to get through combat. Something I was reminded of while playing this game is that there is not a big variety of melee combat moves, and frequently you're mixing and jumping around, shooting, and just straight up mashing that melee button, which then allows you to activate a specific Wung Fu move that then builds up your super Wung Fu. The problem here being that they just kind of unlock a lot of the stuff for you, and anything you do put points into is incremental at best, or it'll be specific to your class or just general perks. It rarely ever felt satisfying for me to unlock moves or perks or even try a different melee weapon because the moves don't feel drastically different from one another. Unstoppable Pig may look and behave slightly different than Unknowable Force, but otherwise a lot of these moves just tend to be your character flinging or spinning around the weapon or a very specific way that does a lot of damage. In that regard, I was kind of reminded how the melee combat never felt super satisfying. Even when you do super Wung Fu, there's only so many times you can rapidly punch enemies and beat them to death before it starts to feel repetitive. Add to that, they did add post-launch over a year ago the ability to lock on, and the locking on is, while an improvement over how it was at launch, it just still doesn't feel as sticky as it needs to be because it feels so easy to just go into your shooting range or go shoot an enemy with your gun and you just lose that lock on target, and just makes the lock on so clunky. And I'd almost rather it not be there, or at least turn it off in some kind, because if it's there, I'm going to use it, but it just felt overall very clunky in execution. Moving on to ranged combat, it's a fairly similar issue as a lot of Wung Fu is unlocked for you upon unlocking the weapon or equipping it, which makes what you can get pretty minimal. Guns have infinite ammo, though they need to reload from time to time, and honestly, a lot of the time they just felt like little pea shooters. I don't know if it felt that way because that's just how they sounded. It's like if I was just trying to be fucking annoying around my apartment by banging pots and pans together and smacking them around like a man who just discovered he only has a few weeks to live but is oddly happy about it and can only express his joy by smacking together some culinary tools. I like the biogenetic mutations since it adds some flavor to the gameplay as well as the psi abilities. There's fun combinations you can make even if they're not all the most effective, like combining levitation and key spark is a blast, and even if you always have to rely on those melee attacks and shooting to get through fights, I like some of the powers you can get, even the less effective ones like the mushroom you can jump on. If I had to say one thing about them when I was playing it, it's more that I often forgot that I even had them available. And you can only map up to 4 at a time, which is a kind of a bummer. It means you can't really feel good about unlocking a bunch of different things because you are always going to be swapping them out at points to try other things. I actually have this problem with a lot of other RPGs, so it's not contained to just Biomutant. I want to be clear, I am happy to have a limited number of ability slots, but limited to 4 when there's so many is a bit underwhelming, and not having an easy way of swapping those out beyond going into the menu and equipping it makes it a bit of a clunky system to interact with. Something as simple as a quick menu or a hot menu of sorts that expands beyond this list of 4 rather you can just kind of map would have helped quite a bit, and even add to make the combat a bit more tactical. I will say, the crafting I do like. It's a bit intuitive, pretty intuitive I should say, and lets you create some pretty powerful, often crazy looking experimental arms that will really impress that crush of yours. You can be like, hey girl, look at this weapon I crafted in Biomutant. Want to go out sometime? And she'll be all like, what the fuck? Alright folks, I want to let you in on something. I don't tell a lot of people this, but I'm going to tell you now. I'm not that smart. I don't think I'm that smart. So when I tell you that my builds in RPGs tend to be whatever makes me feel stronger each time, that's more so what it is. If there's a class or specific playstyle, I will 100% favor that of course, or even do respecs and changes to be more efficient, but I tend to just do what feels good. I don't get very scientific though with my builds as some people do. I don't carry the 9, add the 1. I don't even know what that means. I'm just saying words at this point, but maybe that just makes me a lover of RPGs who plays them a little less scientifically and more what just feels right to me. And there's nothing wrong with that. At least I don't think so. But there's nothing wrong with that. But Biomutant really made it hard to even establish that kind of loose build that I like to have in these games and fine tune them later once I learn more about how it works. It's not super varied in what you can unlock as I mentioned, and even something as simple as me wanting to find another cool looking katana was impossible because one that is better than my current one and looks like a katana just didn't exist. So I used the same weapons more or less for the whole game, just upgrading them as I got better materials. I never felt like I was making a build more than I was just making small adjustments around the margins, and then I just leveled up enough where enemies just trembled before me. You all know what I mean, right? That feeling in a game where you easily outpace your opponents and rarely find yourself treated to a greater challenge than maybe one of the game's main bosses. That tend to be fairly gimmicky anyway. Now, open world games are fairly common these days, and to me, they've become a bit tiresome, and to a lot of you, I know you feel the same. So my general thought is, if you're making one, justify it. And what I mean by that is that you need to make the traversal dynamic and fun, good gameplay, have a sense of discovery, and some varied environments, and of course a decent variety of tasks and quests to follow outside of the main story, of course. And maybe the story should also be good, but either way, hit those things. Not every single one of these points here needs to be met to the nth degree, but some mixture or varying degrees of each can make an open world game much more engaging than it would be if it didn't have any of them. I would even argue that just one of these things that's exceptional can elevate the open world above the pack. I think of Spider-Man from 2018, by extension, of course, Miles Morales, made the feeling of swinging webs around Manhattan so utterly enjoyable that any other mindless tasks there may be, or any other issues aside, are easily forgotten because the swinging is so damn freeing and fun. Now, Biomutant doesn't really nail any of the above. Spoiler alert. It provides you with a wide variety of vehicles to traverse the environments in, and it's awesome to first step foot in that mech, of course, until you realize, and I remember having played this game before, that a lot of the vehicles and mounts end up just serving as a gimmick to get you through or over to a certain place, and then you can no longer move in them or call them. The mech is only really for the areas devoid of oxygen, until of course you get the airtight suit, which gives you 100% resistance to deoxidization. That's a hard word to say, holy shit. The air float or blimp or airship, I guess, is cool until you realize it's only to get you over to this late game area that is not tied to anything meaningful in the story or quest related, and nothing more. Further, you can get mounts that act as the Biomutant's equivalent of a horse, but even then, they're often a little floaty, and sure, they're available in most areas, but finding the best one is a chore, and I honestly just couldn't tell you the difference between which abomination was the best abomination, or which abomination was a nicer looking one, because they all just are horrifying to look at. And I really don't mean that to be disrespectful at all. I think the game's atmosphere and aesthetic is where it excels, honestly, but some of these creatures, man, like, God, it's what I imagine tripping balls on acid with no sleep feels like. You're not sure if it's real, and just to be safe, you're gonna throw your PS5 off the 5th floor balcony in the apartment because you're convinced creatures live specifically in your PlayStation only. The Goo Glide is probably my favorite of the bunch because it feels appropriate weight-wise. It reacts to water properly, it is not terribly fast and also not terribly slow, especially with further engine upgrades. But again, all the vehicles end up being shallow, gimmicky ways to traverse small sections, and it makes traversing the map or even being able to know which sections of the map you can use said vehicles in pretty lackluster. Further, there's plenty of places to find and explore, and you can sometimes get upgrade points or biomutation points or psi points to upgrade. Maybe even change your character appearance, but as is the theme of this game, it gets very repetitive very quickly, and it doesn't feel like rewarding at all at a certain point. I will compare it to working in a retail store, and your boss says to you, "Hey person I employ, I need you to go stock this shelf." And then an hour or two later, your boss finds you again and says, "Hello, same person from before. I need you to stock this shelf now." And this repeats throughout the day until the next day you do it again. And hey, maybe you did a good job. Maybe you really showed that shelf you restocked what it looks like when a person puts in a good, honest day's work. It feels good, but after a while, that feeling fades because it rarely feels different than what you did about an hour ago or the day before. I apologize if that was like deeply profound and that just triggered you for whatever reason, but it triggered me just by saying it. So this is Biomutant in a nutshell. Kill these enemies, grab this thing, unlock this box, and loot this. I could probably forgive some of that if there were meaningful quests and stories packaged in here, but there isn't. And here we have a great segue into the story. Although I did ruin it by acknowledging it, and now you're annoyed with me, if you aren't already. Up until this point, we've just talked about the gameplay and the systems in the game itself, so no real spoilers, but now I am probably going to end up spoiling major points of Biomutant's story here, so be forewarned. I personally don't think the story is so compelling that you should probably care, and as mean as that sounds, I want to tell you if it really is your mission to experience Biomutant's story yourself before I ruin it, I would head out now if you're still here. Okay, so I have to admit something here that I didn't really acknowledge the first time. I didn't really fully appreciate Biomutant's story the first time around. Now, don't misunderstand me. I still find it kind of mindless and just devoid of substance. But even so, I didn't give it enough credit for at least having the ideas, or at least the vague attempt to deliver some ideas, which sounds like an incredibly low bar and possibly a little condescending of a thing to say, but I am intending that as a compliment of sorts. After creating your character, you're thrown into this game world, fighting a big dude, known as Lupa Lupin. At least you find that out later. Or maybe you fucking don't. I don't know. It's gonna sound like this game has a lot going on, but it doesn't really. It just kind of has things that will happen and you'll nod your head and go, wow, that's definitely a thing that happened. I definitely watched that. I need to remind you that this game has a narrator. And even if you turn him off completely, he still has moments where he must talk, progress that story along. But either way, talking to characters is just mumbles with him off, and the dialogue is mainly, well, the intent of the dialogue is just being explained to you through the narrator. Lupa Lupin tries to kill you, but you escape before he can, and then you find yourself traversing a bunker to get out into the open world. You meet a character in a wheelchair named Out of Date, which in flashbacks has the name Best Before, which is rather funny, admittedly. Not laugh out loud, but amusing. Basically, it's explained to you that the Tree of Life is dying, and you need to unite the 6 warring tribes to either help destroy the tree or save it. We have 2 major storylines now to pursue: the Tribe War or the Tree of Life, which has you fighting the game's 4 main bosses to save and protect the tree, or destroy the tree. Whichever you tackle first, they're both equally mundane and boring, and even unimaginative flat out. There's 6 tribes. 3 want to save the Tree of Life, and the other 3 want to destroy, believing that destroying it will allow the world to reset and be born anew. None of this is interesting. It sounded cool at first, but the only thing that makes the tribes semi-different is their specific tribe weapon and gear. Otherwise, they all feel similar. You capture an outpost, and you're treated to a screen of the tribe leader taunting you and saying you made them weaker. But they will not relent or give up, only for them to give up after you conquer 2 of the tribes and you basically flex on the other tribes with a massive dick swing and say, hey man, look what I did to these guys. Maybe just don't bother. And they're like, haha, yeah, man, a good idea. What do you want to do? You want to save the tree, destroy it? We're cool, whatever. Then there's the main story of fighting the World Eaters. Okay, so when you first face them, it's actually kind of cool, right? You see these massive hulking beasts and you think, damn, this is gonna be cool. And then when you get in the arena, it feels that way. You're like, whoa, this is gonna be great. You feel like it's gonna be something special. Then it begins. And usually you have a vehicle or mount of some kind to start the battle, and that makes it super gimmicky. And even if you accept the fight being gimmicky, the frustration I have is in the lack of any type of challenge in these fights. It more becomes a war of attrition here. You're just trying to do as much damage as you can because all of the enemies, including the bosses, are so spongy. Even when you die, you get sent back to a recent checkpoint if you had moved to a new phase of the fight. Sure, it would be complete, utter bullshit if the fight restarted every death, but at least it would add some kind of challenge onto these lackluster fights. They do nothing more than prove to me that they're just bigger versions of enemies you fought before and are just spongy beyond belief, as I just mentioned, a problem all of the enemies in this game have. There's also a small subplot here with this arc you can convince people aligned with your morality to join you with. You can only have 6 people with you, and since one of them will be you and Out of Date, you could only pick 4 more. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not really sure what the purpose is of saving the world by defeating the world leaders and then having your character say fuck it and blasting off to God knows where. It doesn't really make much sense to me because it's presented as a kind of like last resort thing if everything goes horribly, but if you defeat the world leaders and save the Tree of Life, where are you going to go? As far as I can tell, I got the good ending, but your character still gets on the arc and pieces out. Like, my job's done, see you later, everybody. And the tribes are all just like, we united for this dick? And you're like, yeah, I guess. I also find these characters and their morality so hysterical just by how cartoonishly bad some of it is. And not bad as in bad as in just badly presented. You'll meet a character, for example, who loves to blow shit up. He's like, I love blowing shit up. It's so good, man. Don't even care who's nearby, who I'm hurting. If your morality is marked as good, like if you're on the light side, you ask him to join you on the arc, and his response is something like, I appreciate it, but you're not gonna let me just bomb everything to Kingdom Come, so why would I come with you? It's like, okay, don't come with me, you fucking psychopath. Either way, this part is a little meh to me. I guess you could just say it's more of a, well, your work is done here, off to the next place to heal, but it kind of just ruins the stakes the game previously tried to put in place. In the backdrop of all of this is your upbringing as a kid and how your mother taught you the way of Wong Fu, something she was responsible for creating. The vicious Lupa Lupin and his band of miscreants burns down your village one night and comes for your mom and dad. He comes for you as well, but lets you live. He kills both of your parents, and after that, there's a whole bunch of missing years here on this timeline and explanation of what the fuck your guy was actually doing during this whole time. And I guess you can kind of just write it off and assume they were biding time and learning and getting stronger or whatever, but it's not really clear like what they were doing this whole time, just chilling until Loopalupin found them. Now this game tries really hard to introduce this moral struggle for you as the character. Are you seeking the path of good and more righteousness by seeking out Loopalupin in hopes of confronting your past and forgiving him? Or are you hoping to finally exact revenge on Loopalupin for destroying your life? When I say it tries really hard to instill this into you, I mean it does so ad nauseum. So very ad nauseum. You constantly meet characters that say they remember you, or they're just meeting you for the first time. Regardless, they're all like, hey man, remember that thing that happened to you? Yeah, you gotta confront it one way or another, and your response is always one of two things. It's either, nah, I want vengeance, or I'm ready to forgive. And the other character's response is almost always something like, hey, it's up to you, man. I'm just saying. Like, what is happening? This is just such a frequent occurrence. I recall times of me sitting alone in my apartment playing this game, just yelling at my TV. I get it, man. I forgive him, but let's focus the fuck up here. We got shit to do. Something I kind of forgot about on my initial playthrough, but I definitely connected with a bit more this time, and I really do appreciate this about the game, is how they try to make Loopalupin more nuanced as a character by explaining that your mother and her tribe raided the home of Loopalupin's mother years ago when he was a kid, and they killed her. And from then on, he swore revenge. And even though your character had nothing to do with it, he swore he would make your mother, and then further, her offspring, that's you, suffer the same fate. This is actually a pretty compelling turn for this character and an important reveal. I think it was just executed rather poorly and too late for it to have a lasting impact on me and my decision making towards the end. And even then, your final fight with him ends in the Tree of Life stopping you and then basically forcing you to finish all of the other things that you have going on before you come back and finish him off. It ends up being kind of silly and anticlimactic. Even if the villain arc of Loopalupin, which I do kind of like, is more nuanced than the rest of the game, it still doesn't have me 100% sold, given you see him all of like a handful of times, and he doesn't even recognize how far he has gone with very little hesitance to stop himself, or even remorse, or even maybe even talking to you a little bit would kind of maybe be able to push him a little bit more in the forgiveness kind of section or side. Now, if you're hearing all of that and you think, wow, that actually sounds legitimately awesome and compelling, and it might be, but did I mention that it comes up in the third act? And also the narrator again speaks for all of the characters, and it makes it hard to connect with when you have a disembodied voice speaking on everyone's behalf. I think I would rather if they just stuck with silence and just text and use the music and mumbling of the characters to give it character and life. It just seems like solving for a problem that doesn't really need to be remedied, because some of the best games ever made to have no voice lines. I will say one last thing on the story. I do think I appreciate here is that they made an attempt at building out the world with the lore and trying to make a commentary on pollution and years of corporate meddling that bled the planet dry of resources to the point where the world has begun to die out. We hear about Toxinol, a company name that just sounds evil just by the very sound your mouth makes as the word escapes your lips. Toxinol. Toxinol lied about the amount of pollution that they had caused and what they were doing for years for their own profit, and thus it's contributed to the state of the world as we meet it in Biomutant. If nothing else, that's a pretty cool bit of lore, and I think it gives the game a bit of mystery to it. What did this world look like before all this? And what spawned different tribes to rise up and form different beliefs on how to go about fixing or saving this world? Some really cool stuff in there. Okay, I've already talked about this game way more than I had planned. This video is way longer than I ever intended it to be, but I promise we're almost done. But here's where we kind of get into some more of the positives, even though I've been beating up on this game quite a bit. First off, I kind of love the music. And it's where I started to get why this game can be a draw for some folks. It creates this almost zen-like quality to it. You feel at peace even as the world is slowly crumbling. Even when the battle music kicks in, it complements the game. It's a bit repetitive, and I would have wanted to have heard more variety from the various themes of music, especially in battle. But regardless, I enjoy it. The vibe is a false sense of security and peace, and as such, an easy game to turn on and lose yourself in for a few hours at a time. Now, there's not a lot of voice acting, but what is here ranges from
No! God, please, no! No!
and okay. Please God no is the narrator, and okay is your moral compass, good and bad, light and dark. Now, light and dark constantly come up and respond to your moral decisions, and it's always the same conversation of them lamenting that you chose the other option and the other one is gloating. I just don't give a fuck about any of these characters or either of them, and it would have just been fine for me if I just didn't have to see them pop up after every dark or light choice. Now, something I lamented in the PS4 version of the game was the inconsistent frame rate, even though it was performing at a higher frame rate than on the base models of the PlayStation 4, and the amount of blurry and flat textures all over the map and lack of foliage. I am happy to say this is mostly remedied. For comparison's sake, this isn't going to look as good as some AAA games on the market, which it doesn't have to, but for what it is, it looks cute and fun. The frame rate holds pretty well on performance mode at 60, and honestly, what more could I ask for than 60 FPS in a game about performing crazy kung fu moves? Just makes the game better. But here's the final verdict on Biomutant. Again, I like this game. Not a crazy amount, but as I have said and alluded to, I get why people love this game, why people will be drawn to it. It's just got a zen-like quality to it. And sometimes just having a game you can play for a bit, throw a podcast on and lose yourself in is enough. If you can get it for like $30 or something, and you just want to whack some critters around for a bit, it might even be cheaper at this point. It doesn't have the staying power of other games that do a lot of what it does but better, but there's no denying it has a draw to it. But ultimately, I hesitate to give it a full recommendation, only because it has so much unrealized potential and systems that are just not fully fleshed out. I would love to see if they went back to it, this dev I mean, and maybe try to improve upon things going forward, but I don't know. Biomutant is just a weird game that I liked but wanted to love and just crumbles under the weight of its ambitions of a small team. A friend of mine, having just played the game himself for the first time, said to me, I liked it, don't get me wrong, but I would have liked it more if it was just a more linear experience. And I agree with this wholeheartedly. Trying to do much with very little can have you missing your own aspirations a little bit. So my biggest recommendation here to the team is that you have a good solid core here, a solid foundation. And what a small team of like 12 or so people or however many could do was impressive. But I think making it a more directed experience could have benefited this game, and maybe something a little bit more linear, and maybe they could have focused more on little things to get right, like the combat. I don't know if I'm qualified to give advice on game design, more I can just kind of articulate what I liked and didn't like about this experience. Ultimately, if you got this far, I want to thank you for joining me on this video. I humbly ask you to just like the video, or dislike it, or comment below your thoughts, and maybe if you're even feeling crazy, you just subscribe, I don't know. Regardless, I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next video. I mean, not literally see you, but you know what I mean, right?